Katie Underwood, welcome to Real Insight.
Thank you.
This is a buzz for me. And the reasons for that are many, but the most important reason is you were one of the first fully fledged reality TV stars.
Yeah, please don't hold that
in the
against
country.
me.
I don't hold it against you. I think it's amazing. And that came at a time, and I've sort of put some notes around this because the time that happened was such an impactful time, both in the way media was changing forever, with the way that music was changing forever. So in the year 1999, we have Napster appear, which starts to really change the way things are going. Popstars is in 2000, which was even before Big Brother, which is 2001. And then reality TV becomes a thing. And a lot of people don't understand that before 2000, reality TV was barely a thing.
It wasn't in Australia.
No. Sylvania Waters, I think, was about as good as we got, and that was pretty bad. And then 2001 comes the iPod and iTunes, which really makes a dent in the industry. Later on, we get some streaming and things like that. But from your perspective, going into a reality TV show where it had been something that we'd never seen before, what was that like?
Well, for us and even the record label and the television company, it was a total unknown. Nobody really knew what was going to happen. They suspected it would be successful. But I think it even surpassed their wildest imaginings as to how successful that was going to be. And for two reasons. One, just the concept of reality TV being applied to an industry that had always been very shrouded in mystique and exclusivity and, private VIP rooms and stuff that you just didn't know what really went on in the business, and that was apparently appealing. And yet in this show, they got to peel away that we were ordinary people. We were working really hard. We were not always enjoying it. There was very little glamour. They say in the music business, it's about 10% music and 90% business.
Yeah.
The average person isn't interested in that because it's boring. They just want the glamour in the show, and particularly in pop music, but even in rock, the image, the lifestyle, the apparent aspirational lives that people believe that musicians have. And I think this show and probably subsequent docos and other shows since have pulled that mystique right away and go, actually, people in this business work really, really hard. And we're not even just talking about when they're touring and performing, but the thousands of hours that go towards writing the songs, crafting the music, making bands work and everything else. Dodgy managers, unscrupulous record companies. I mean, it's cutthroat and hard work on so many levels.
And it was a time when if you wanted to enter into the music industry, you had to go through a gatekeeper. Like it wasn't the type of place where, unless you were happy playing acoustic covers in the local pub for the next 30 years, if you wanted to go next level, you had to go through, where that's a bit different now. When you were on the non-pop star side of pop stars, were you geared for a performance career? Was that something that was in your, like, I want to be a musician, I want to be famous? Was that one of the drivers?
Kind of. I never wanted to be famous. I've always done music though. So literally just prior to going for the auditions and then attending the Sydney auditions for pop stars, I had been playing in a jazz band for about 6 months. We just started to get a residency, and for the average everyday kind of band, that's a cool thing.
Yeah.
That you get booked regularly every week, that some venue is like, yeah, absolutely, show up every week. This is our agreed fee, bang. It's like bread and butter for a musician or a band. So that was happening. I'd also independently released or rewritten a trance music track from the UK, sent my vocals over to some dude who I'd never met before, and 6 months, 12 months later, flew over to the UK and recorded 3 tracks on his album.
Yeah,
so
right.
I'd already started to make, so there is a music story prior to pop stars that's lesser known. So I'd already started to make some inroads in the two genres of music that I was passionate about, which was jazz and blues and then also dance music.
Yeah.
So pop was never on my radar, and one of my best friends, Scott, still can't believe it when I say, and it's true, I've never really been into pop music, and it's hilarious to me that I ended up being in one of the most famous pop bands in recent Australian music history. It's crazy.
And as an observer, it's funny because that was a really musical time in my life as well. I just dropped out of a university degree in computer science because I'm like, this is not for me. Yeah. And then I went and did music, and I did a music degree at Vic Uni out in Sunbury where they had a dedicated music campus, and it was 4 years of just production and writing and meeting all the people, and best time of my life. But it was also a time that I became very aware of the industry. And so you're observing these trends and sort of working out what's going on next because you had to eventually have some sort of career. From an observer's point of view, I think observing you in pop stars, it always felt to me like you were the odd one out. And that is based on the persona that you would always portray. Did it feel that way? You know, could you sort of feel that, I'm here, but it's not where my heart is?
Yeah. And I made no secret of that. Obviously, I didn't proclaim that publicly, but I think all of the other girls in the band had at some point done one of the singing, dancing schools. You know, they had in some way or other geared themselves towards that career, whether it was being in a band or whatever. And I suppose I was in a band, but jazz is totally different from pop music. So it was no secret that that wasn't my first choice, but I also saw it as an opportunity. A huge risk. The contract was awful, but I made an educated guess and just went, you know what's the worst that could happen?
Yeah.
It'll be shit. I won't enjoy it. And like any job that you do for a bit, give it a go. You don't like it. Well, if I really hate it, I'll leave.
Yeah.
Not that I went in with that intention. Of course, once the 5 girls bonded properly, we developed this idealistic fantasy that, oh, yes, we're going to make it last forever. It's going to be great. And that was genuine in the beginning. And then over time, I guess that gets eroded by the reality and the grueling nature of it for us, particularly because we were signed to a major label, which means they have to make their money back.
At all costs.
At any cost.
Yeah.
So, don't worry about working us 7 days a week for months on end. Don't worry about scheduling us from 6 a.m. until, 11 p.m. on the daily. It's like, no, we've got to grind this machine until we make some buck.
Because you're doing appearances like shopping centre stuff and interviews and TV shows, and it was just consistent. And I think that was also something from an observer's point of view is, okay, is this what reality TV is going to be like? Because it was like it was so in your face to your point where you're like, I feel like they're going to burn these people out. Like this just can't last because of the ringer that you're on.
Yeah, and I think even prior to reality TV putting a lens on that, I think now that's why pop artists in general do burn out so fast because it is a quick up and down. Pop music by default is just popular for a very short amount of time.
Yeah.
And so then the idea from any label that's got you is we have to make the most of this while it lasts because we know it won't. So let's grind this puppy as hard as we can until the next one comes along.
What was your biggest lesson that you learnt through that time? Because you've had a career that has excelled well beyond that, where some of the other girls in the band haven't. Some have done brilliantly, some have not. What do you think you learnt from that set you aside?
I think probably one of the best pieces of advice I got early on was from my first music industry lawyer, and we were looking at the value of a publishing contract and what that was worth. And he said, well, there's a couple of ways you can do it with music publishing, and that is the money that you get back from songs that you write or masters that you own. He said, if you don't intend to stick around for a very long time, if this is just a flash in the pan for you, then get yourself a publishing deal, take the advance, knowing that you'll never have to pay it back and run for your life.
Yeah.
But if you intend to be around for a long time, don't sign your publishing away. You'll get no big advance up front, but the long-term gain will be far greater.
Yeah.
And I took his advice on board, and as a result, never signed myself to a publisher in that sort of way. Having said that, I've had a wonderful relationship with Peer Music, who've been my publisher since 2020, but on what you would call an admin deal, which is unheard of now, which basically means they were taking only 10% for years. It wasn't even a thing.
Yeah.
But then the downside is they also didn't promote me as a writer or a songwriter. So it was really up to me to sort of put it out there. Now we have a bit more of an equitable relationship, but, you know, they still don't take that much. And frankly, anything under 20% is like, hey, guys, I don't want to process my own royalties. Please handle that side of my life for me. That's worth it. But it means that a lot of my independent releases I've gotten good returns from. Like my entire New Age catalogue, I've had no marketing budget, 6 albums that I've, you know, self-produced and funded. And even though they don't spin huge amounts, I get regular, consistent and ever increasing money back from that, passive income from that. And I'm seeing that growing more and more each year. So it's a slow burn approach to go, no, I don't want a huge advance because I'm only going to have to pay that back. I'll just kind of do things on my own. But there's pros and cons as indie versus major label, and there always has been, regardless of reality TV.
Yeah, because particularly I think, you know, back to that point of in the day of having to go through a gatekeeper, like you were never going to have a big time international music career unless you got signed. And then there were a bunch of people in that era that were getting signed and then realizing it wasn't such a good deal. And then after that, in the early 2000s in particular, then getting signed was far more about just the validation. It was like, I just need to get signed to get on a record label because that's what people thought. And I think there was a bit of an illusion there because once people realized, well, I can use the internet and I can engage directly with my fans and they can just follow me on social media and I can actually exchange direct. That to me was that point when record labels must have gone, ooh, like we've got a big problem now because now they don't need us as much as they used to in order to have an acceptable living.
Look, I think labels have adapted and they've adapted by taking a slice of companies like Spotify. So before where they were overtly taking your earnings, now they're subvertly taking your earnings.
Yeah.
They've still managed to, I think, stay ahead of the average artist. The thing that I will say, though, the appeal of a major label is not even just having that team of people to support you because you can build that, but their access to marketing and PR avenues are usually far greater, that they can just open doors because they work for a record label. Whereas if you're just, you know, Jam such and such, Joe such and such, who's released an album, you can't just call up the biggest PR firm in Melbourne and say, hey, I've got an album I'd love you to help me promote, because they'll just say, who are you?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
We don't want to associate with you. And I actually had that experience with a PR company, a dance music PR company in Melbourne who will remain nameless, who charged a lot of money to promote you to DJs and other people, but can't guarantee placements. But it's an open secret that they tend to just look after their own stable of people. And for everyone else, they'll take your money because they've got the brand, but really don't deliver. So it's still a who you know business, even for indie artists. So then I think the onus is on that independent artist to, you've got to build your own connections. Go out there and do the legwork. And if you're prepared to do that, then it will work. But that's where being an independent musician takes a hell of a lot more than just talent and stable mental health.
Yeah, which is a rarity in the industry.
And if you can get even just past those two things, then are you organised to run your own accounting? Can you also afford to have a lawyer and an accountant? Are you prepared to go out there and go to events and actually talk to all these people and then remember things? Like it's a lot. It can be done, but it's actually a massive undertaking, I think, to be a successful indie artist. So it really depends how hard you're prepared to work. And if you go into music thinking, it's going to be just like chill, nah.
Hard work.
Hard work, possibly harder work than showing up
at
for
a place like this.
Standard job where you're like, just tell me what to do and pay me at the end of the week.
Yep. Yeah, different world.
Does not happen.
You were the first out of pop stars. And is that because this isn't for me anymore? Was that the driver for you? Did you need to pursue something else?
I was planning to stay for the second album, and it was a very weird sequence of events. And myself and Belinda have spoken about this many times.
The Splendid Chapel?
Yeah. And we went through a huge change. We helped renegotiate a better contract for the second album. I was kind of the legal mouthpiece for that. The girls trusted me to sort of, write emails and that sort of thing. But it was obviously a collaborative effort in working together and figuring out what we wanted. And in that process, we got rid of our old management team and took on a new manager who we thought would represent us better and get us paid gigs, which is what we hadn't been getting.
Yep.
Weirdly, though, he came on board and very quickly started siphoning us off and encouraging us to do projects independently. Now, it's uncertain still whether he genuinely thought that would benefit the band or whether there was some ulterior motive that, well, I'll just split up the herd and then whichever one floats to the top, I'll take them and continue on. So the beginning of the end for me was the suggestion by our new manager for me to go and audition for a musical, Hair the Musical, which was going to be a huge arena thing. Harriet Miller, Christina knew, I think it was John Stevens or a few other sort of famous people of the time that were, well known and respected. And I was honoured to be asked to audition, did my thing. But I said then, I'm like, well, how do you see this working? How am I going to be in a musical that's touring Australia and also be promoting the second album for Bardot? Like, what are you thinking? Oh, well, you won't do it. You won't get it, but I think you should audition. I think it'll be a really good experience. And even that in itself,
doesn't sit well.
I'm literally sitting there in the Tarago. We're in the UK at the time cutting the first 2 tracks of the second album. I'm like, this feels off, but all right, fine. Challenge accepted. Of course, I go in an audition, get the part. Crazy thing is I didn't find that out from him. I found that out from someone at Harriet Miller's office, and they're like, we'll just give you a call and just check that did you get the video that we sent you and the script that we send you? I said, what are you talking about? Oh, yeah. Oh, it's hilarious. Well, you got the part and we just hadn't heard back from you. So we're wondering, maybe you didn't get the stuff. I'm like, I did not know that. And this woman, I can't remember her name, she said, I think you need to come in and have a meeting with Harry M. I'm like, yeah, I think I do.
Yeah.
So that was really it. And then, the rest is history. I took the part and jumped on board and then had to leave Bardot. Sadly, the musical didn't go ahead. 10 days after tickets went on sale, they pulled it.
And that's just another one of those.
That's how ruthless it was.
Yeah.
And they had 9, major principals, huge cast, not to mention all the tech people that would have been in line. 10 days of sales, and some AI, I don't know, or maybe some human being accountant just went, I don't think we have the numbers to fill all these arenas. Better pull the plug. Don't worry about all the rest of us that have literally said no to other projects to jump on board for this. That's fine. Yeah, we've got nothing better to do.
Ruthless.
Just
ruthless. Because then they're like, oh, well, sorry about that inconvenience. Yeah. I hope you do well from here on in.
Yeah.
Craziness. Not long after that, though, was where I saw an amazing moment. And that was when you teamed up with Disco Montego.
Yeah.
And Beautiful. That track for me was because I was deep in the house and prog music. I was a DJ in Melbourne. When that thing hit, it hit. And that was one of those tracks where you could go, oh, she's found her comfort zone. That's exactly, there was no effort. It was effortless. It just felt like it was a piece of music that, that was sort of you were born with. Did you feel that as well? Did that feel comfortable for you?
Yeah. The wonderful thing about that trajectory of Beautiful was that it was getting massive play in the clubs well before the public became aware of it. And the beauty of it was nobody knew it was me yet. And because being in Bardot had branded me as this pop star, which to me was not an advantage, went against everything I was. I've been a trained musician. I played piano at the age of 6, choir for years from 11. I was a very talented musician and vocalist, and to be branded with, just being a pop star was almost offensive. But, go, okay, I can't change anybody's mind about that.
Yeah.
So when Beautiful came out and people just loved this song, and then it was about it had been in the clubs already for about 3 months, and then finally became known as public. Oh, it's Katie Underwood and Disco Montego and then we were off. Also the fact that the guys had given me the opportunity to write the song with them was a massive win for me. So it got me the opportunity to stretch my songwriting muscle. I never really thought of myself as a great writer, but we did manage to pull it together on that song. So, yeah, it was validating on a number of levels that I was then known and appreciated in the dance world, which was my comfort zone.
Yeah.
And also acknowledged as a writer. And we went ahead and got the APRA Award, which, for those that don't know, is a songwriting industry award that year for, most played dance track. So it was a massive win for me personally and certainly career-wise.
Still stands up.
Yeah.
It's a killer tune. It still stands up. And I think particularly, at that time, there was a bunch of stuff that was going on in Melbourne. There was cool prog stuff happening out of like the Zero Tolerance labels and things. The Vicious guys were pretty pronounced at that time in doing house stuff. And yeah, it was just great to see you there and dominating that spot for a while. It was really good. It felt like one for the home team, because we were all house DJs just trying to make a living and get a gig.
Yeah.
And then to see, someone that had come from that world and like now it's like, yeah, they're rooting for us. So that was killer.
That was good.
I dig that. So from there, what happens? What goes on with sort of where you take that professional, and before we get to, the stuff that you're working on now, whilst you're still sort of in raw entertainment, what were the other chapters that sort of came after that?
Well, interestingly, about a year after that, so it got to a point where I chose to stop touring with Disco Montego. I won't go into the reasons why explicitly, other than it just became uncomfortable for me.
Yep.
Socially.
Yep.
And there have been various points in my life where I've had to look at how much something is really worth. And this comes down to, I guess, the kind of person I am, the values that I have. And there's no right or wrong about it. There's just what kind of person you are. And for me, this was one of those first turning points. It's like, yeah, I could continue making a couple of grand per gig, but risk being unhappy every single time. Or I could jump ship and go, that's enough of that. That's not worth it. No amount of money in the world is worth doing a job where I feel unappreciated or devalued or any other things that can happen in a unfriendly workplace. And go, no, there's more to life than making money. So I chose to go on my own, and I went on a songwriting trip in 2003 with the idea to putting together finally my own, full-length pop album, getting a deal, doing all that stuff. While I was over there, I was courted by, I think it was Universal in London, and they were interested. They'd seen Beautiful, the track, at Meetum, which is the International Music Conference, and apparently had been hugely well received over there. And so people were fascinated by, who's this girl and who are these guys and what's going on. And they basically offered me a deal, but only if I was going to do it with the guys. And at that point, our relationship had broken down already. And I said, I had to call their bluff and say, no, I'm here for a solo deal. And I didn't get it. So again, that was one of those things, okay, well, how much is my fame and success worth here? Is it worth going back into a situation where it's going to be emotionally challenging? Or do I stick to my guns and go, no, this is what I want? So I didn't get the deal in the UK, came back to Australia, got a deal with a smaller indie transistor that were really great for a while. Yeah, and then what happens? And then you get chewed up by the industry. So, yeah, during that next 12 months, my manager managed to screw me over in my deal with him. The record label dissolved and disappeared, very much like the Hair the Musical people. Oh, no, that's it. We want to go sailing in Cairns. Sorry, our record label is now over.
Darn.
And I was dropped along with a few other artists and all the staff, and just insane amount of self-serving
Yeah.
people in the business. So it was after that I went, okay, I'm not. I don't need to be famous that much. There's more to me than just my musicality.
Yeah.
And I actually just flew under the radar for ages. I worked in my then husband's medical clinic. I did reception work. I was a medical receptionist and a part-time bookkeeper for our business. And it was very humbling, but it reminded me who I was in my character beyond music.
Mm.
And that was key. Because if you only define yourself by one of your talents or one of your skills, it's easy to forget who you really are. So, yeah, the time I spent out of the limelight in that way was really helpful. It's like, hang on a minute, I used to be a maths nerd. Hang on a minute, I have excellent leadership skills. Hang on a minute, I'm great at customer service. I work really hard. I have good ideas. I'm a lateral thinker. Like all of these skill sets that I had not been able to use in this very confined, closed definition of a person. I just thought that I'm much more than just that. And then things started to evolve for me, really.
Is that a trap that people fall into when you have that taste of fame, particularly, and people just can't imagine themselves not being famous anymore? And so then you become so productized that it's like, I just need to do whatever the next manager tells me to do so I can be famous again. A lot of people fall down that rabbit hole, right?
Yeah, I think they do. And it's easy to do because the public in particular only see that very narrow aspect of who you are. They see the piece of you that they want.
Yeah, that's right. And then you have to serve their ideology of what they see you as. And if you don't, then you're not good anymore.
Yeah. And there's very little room then either for personal growth or even creative growth in some way. Sometimes as an artist, and you see this happen time and time again, where an artist will get very famous for a particular sort of sound, and then the next album they'll change something and the fans will rail against them.
They hate it.
Oh, it's no good, it's changed. And, this artist, whoever they might be, is like, as I change personally, of course my creative offering is going to change. That's what being creative is about. It's embracing change, it's evolving, it's being innovative. But the public are not always up for that sort of ride.
Yeah.
So for me, that concept expanded even more broadly. Like I'm not just my musical skill. As a human being, there's so many other things that I have to offer and that I want to bring into the world and that I've managed to do since then. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But yeah, so that was kind of the beginning of just busting open this myth that this is all I am and all I'll ever be.
And let's unpack that part of it too, because one thing you said to me when we caught up a couple of weeks ago that stuck with me, and I've actually thought of it a few times in the last couple of weeks. You said, I've always followed in my career choices, I've always followed my personal learnings. I've let my personal learnings take my career on its journey. Break that down for us, because that really hit with me.
Yeah, 100%. So I suppose the biggest shift in my life was realizing that I no longer wanted to be a victim to my own drug and alcohol use.
Mm-hmm.
For years, I told myself that I was a recreational drug user and it was all fun and everyone was doing it. You're in a nightclub.
Particularly when you're in that scene too, right? Because
absolutely.
It's so everywhere. Yep.
And then one day having an epiphany, realizing that I was trapped now in a lifestyle that I didn't enjoy. I was doing it because I needed to rather than because what I wanted to. And I suppose that's what defines, drug and alcohol use to addiction or dependence. And I just thought, this isn't what I want my life to be. I was in my late 20s, way too young to have just gone, this is all I'll ever be. And then I'd left my marriage, and so I had some money to spend. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to invest in myself. I'm going to invest in going to rehab. I'm going to sort this out. I need to shake myself up. I need to remember who I am when I'm not sitting around smoking bongs and drinking beers. Like,
yep.
It had really gotten that bad. And it was during that process of detoxing my life. And by detoxing my life, it was, when you decide to give up or reduce drugs and alcohol, it's not just the substances that you end up clearing out. It's also certain relationships, certain limiting beliefs. Sometimes it's family members, sometimes it's partners, sometimes it's the job that you've been doing, where your self-worth and sense of confidence starts to increase, your hope starts to increase. You're like, okay, well, if I can rejuvenate myself, I wonder what else I could do in my life. And so I bounced into the healing modalities. I was so incredibly inspired by the people that had helped me on my personal journey. I thought, man, I want to do that. And then remembered that massage therapy was something I'd always wanted to do when I was a kid. My mother did it as an adjunct to her beauty therapy career, and I loved helping people. I'd been and still am, caring, compassionate young person. And again, it was part of one of those aspects of myself that I came to remember, oh, that's right. I like helping people. I'm actually not really interested in being that famous person. I never had been. I want to help people. And then acquiring various qualifications in remedial massage, in Reiki therapy, and meditation teacher training, and then eventually sound healing. And then that grew and grew and grew, and studied with multiple people here and overseas, acquiring a whole bunch of new skill sets, many of them involved in music, but being applied in a way that the attention was not on me. It's about serving others and helping other people to find their spark and their centre again. And I never tire of being a part of that process for people.
And I can empathise with that because it's nowhere near similar to the journey that I've been on, but it sort of is because I started out the same way, pursuing this music career where if I'm not famous, then I'm not successful. If I don't sell 1 million records, I'm not successful. And it was always this thing of just beating myself up. I'm ADHD, and one of my biggest symptoms is rejection sensitivity, which is like I was too scared to put music out there because I didn't want people to say I was no good. So I ended up in this spot where the same sort of journey you went on, I had to have a look at myself, and it was in my late 20s, 27, 28. Like, I remember all the things that I used to love doing as well. And a lot of them were technical and somewhat nerdy. And I'd finished a music production degree. So I got into corporate, but AV, music technology, studio building, all that sort of stuff. Connecting back with that child that we all have to connect back with at some point of our life. Do you find now that you have children that looking back and decisions that you make and things like that can lead you down a garden path where what I'm pursuing is not holistically serving me? Is that something that you're very aware of now with your little ones?
Yeah, well, they're not so little now. They're almost 13, both of them. The point that's pressing on the front of my brain just listening to you speak about this is I think that we need to reevaluate our definition of success. For a lot of people, the definition of success is how much money you make, or particularly in the music industry or television industry or public fame industries, how famous you are.
How many likes you've got, how many followers you've got.
All of that stuff. So whereas if we define success as I'm pursuing a career path or a life that brings me joy, that makes me feel self-respected as a human being, and that also enables me to cover my bases, why isn't that raging success?
Yeah.
Over the person who's running 5 companies but is on their second heart attack, their 4th marriage, and doesn't speak to their children because they've had to compromise all of their personal values to achieve this measure of success that was dictated to them when they were young. So how do I then look at my own family? My influence on them is similar to my parents' influence on me, which is we don't care what you do, but whatever you choose to do it to the best of your ability. And that was a key influencer in my life. With my kids, but my parents were still very pro-university.
Yep.
You got to go to university because no one in the family had. And I was the first one to, like yourself, do a half a maths and computer science
Yeah.
degree in Adelaide before I realised I
Not
don't
my
want to
jam.
do this.
Yeah.
So my approach with my kids is different. It's understanding that having been through the university system and having had it dropped out, don't go to university unless you actually know what you want to do.
Yep.
Don't just go there and go, oh, I'll figure it out. Yeah, you won't.
Mm.
You'll just drink a lot of beer, buy a pair of Doc Martens and kind of hang out.
And leave with a massive debt.
And blow
Yeah.
40 grand that you're
Yep.
going to pay back to the government later. Rather, if you don't know what you want to do, there's all of this wonderful vocational training and trades training now. And in fact, we know that we need more tradespeople to step up because that boomer generation is retiring now. And there's going to be this massive gap in the trades market. So I'm almost going the other way with my kids going, well, if there's a trade or a vocational learning pathway that you can follow, then let's get you into that.
Mm.
But also appreciating both my children have artistic gifts. One of my children loves to sing and she loves to perform. So already in a choir, and I have no doubt that there'll be some success for her in that way. But she also wants to be a child psychologist.
Yep.
So I'm going to 1,000% support her to pursue that pathway.
Music therapy.
Because, jobs are good.
Yes.
And also it's a helping profession.
Mm.
My other child is visually artistic. So, yes, I can go, all right, I acknowledge that you're an artist, that you need to do something creative. But, hey, let's also think about getting your bread and butter job, some other trade that if you're going through a period of your life where your art isn't flourishing or it's difficult to get it out there, that there's something else that you can do.
Mm. I love that. And I love it because there's so much dialogue because there's two things that really give me the shits, right? It's this thing of, to your point, unless I'm a CEO running my own business and, a multimillionaire, I'm nothing these days. I love being an awesome number two. Like, I got two people that own this business. I don't own it. And I love that I don't own it because I can go home at the end of the day and actually switch off. Doesn't mean that I'm doing any less. Doesn't mean I'm not putting in any more than anyone else. And I still get the reward. So no, if you're not a CEO and an owner of a company, that's okay. The other thing that I always found as bad advice is, like, if you want to do something, forget everything else and just do it 100%. I can understand that being really strong metaphorically, but it can also be really dangerous if you're not just making sure there's an anchor somewhere. That's the thing that I've always tried to tell people that want to throw caution to the wind and go and do things. That's cool, but put an anchor down because you're going to have to get back there one day. And if you just ride that wave for so long, you don't know where you're going to end up. And I think that's what you're saying, right? It's like, teach the kids that, yep, go all in on whatever you want to do, but have an anchor somewhere you can get back to.
I mean, even from a very basic point of view, a lot of kids don't like doing maths. And I was always very good at maths. I loved it and I was good at it. Whether those two things go together, maybe they do, maybe they don't. So I've got, again, another child that's both are good at it. One enjoys it, one doesn't. And my visual creative child, not so keen. So my approach with them is to say, look, I don't care if you get A's or even B's. But you do need to apply yourself to a point that you can work it.
Mm.
Because even if you end up, say, having a cafe that you either work in or run and you display your art on the walls as an adjunct to your creative career, you still need to learn and know how to run your books. Like, there's a basic level of maths everybody needs.
Yep.
So keep up with it enough that you can make it work. But yeah, I'm not going to stress if you're not like top of the class.
Mm.
On the other hand, the other child, wants to do child psychology. That means doing statistics. That means being quite good at maths. So yeah, you need to keep pushing yourself. And she already knows that. I need to get distinctions at least.
Yeah, you've got to know the path for sure.
At 12, she already knows where she needs to be. And I know I don't need to nag her about that. But I think it's supporting our kids where their natural gifts are.
Mm.
But as you say, using that anchor analogy, also grounding them in, okay, that's great. You're really talented at art, or maybe it's woodwork, or maybe it's something else creative. But how do we then apply that in either a business sense or a job sense where you can feel supported both emotionally and practically in what you're doing?
Mm.
so that then the stress of having to be innovative and creative all the time doesn't get you.
Because you'll make poor choices if you are in a creative realm and it becomes the financial ground stake. Then you're just making choices based on what you think people are going to like. You lose connection with your own muse, and it's just a horrible thing.
Commercialism of art in itself can kill it by default when we are trying to make something we think, will financially work, as opposed to really tapping into what we want to do in our hearts. But that's probably another whole hour.
It's the hardest thing about being a creative, isn't it? Because you're like, well, I know that I have to make my art consumable. Like if no one buys it or no one's into it, it's no good. But then I also want to be true to myself and make sure that, that I'm putting out me.
Do you know what, though? I think that, again, I want to expand the definition of the term being a creative, right? So when you say that, you're saying it as in someone who makes creative things, whether it's art or music or some other manifestation of that. But to me, being a creative is not just about the music I produce or maybe the book that I'm going to write in 10 years. It's also about looking at my life across the board. And if something isn't working, I can approach that situation, that relationship, that job and go, how can I adapt that? How can I be creative in my thinking around what I'm going to do there?
Yep.
To me, that's what it means to be creative. It's not just the products that you're producing. It's how you're actually approaching your entire life as for lack of any more elegant term, as a work of art. Like a pro heart. All right, I'm going to splash some paint on this and I'm going to call that my life. And then 5 minutes later, you look at it and go, could be better. A poor artist will keep slaving away at something that isn't working. A real master will have the balls or the guts to go, stuff that, paint over the entire canvas and go again.
Yep.
And be unafraid to keep failing until you find that thing that makes you feel like, now that's success to me.
Yeah, I get it.
It's that risk-taking, humbling process of being prepared to be wrong.
Yeah.
To find the magical right.
And I think that point too, because again, it's like there are things that you experience but you don't necessarily realize in the same way. And creativity, like I'm a born creative, but then everyone's like, well, why would you give up your creative talent and go and be like a corporate person? I'm like, but my creativity appears in what I do every day because there's always a new problem or there's always a new person with a new problem or there's always, so you are being creative and problem solving organically in that environment. And, creative people tend to be better at it because you're not bound by what's the next step of I've got all these options that I can look at. So yeah, I get it. I do get it. Yeah. Talk to me about your latest big news, which you're just fresh off the back of your first ever TED Talk.
I did a TEDx talk up in Malden. It was on my bucket list. It was something I'd always wanted to do, and I was offered the opportunity to get on board this TEDx event. The hardest thing for me was deciding what to talk about. When I think about myself and my life, I go, well, what could I talk about? Do I talk about being in a pop band? Do I talk about surviving narcissistic abuse in marriage? Do I talk about my newly diagnosed ADHD brain? Do I talk about being a queer person in our industry? Do I talk about being a single parent of twins? Do I talk about
so much?
Do I talk about quantum physics and mechanics that I'm interested in part-time? Or maybe I talk about meditation, or maybe I talk about the power of the body and how we can transform and connect the emotional body with the physical body and how I've been working with that for the last 15 years. Like, far out.
Yeah.
That was the scariest part about, there's all these things. And Paul, who was the curator for this event, kept tapping in and giving me wonderful advice along the way and said, just choose one thing. It's a 12-minute talk. The classic TED Talks can go up to 20 minutes. TEDx's, they tend to like to be a little shorter, more concise. I said, just choose one thing. And I think it took me like 3 months of ruminating and rewriting and brain dumping ideas and running a few things past friends and to finally bring it down to this one concept, or I suppose it came down to sort of 3 or 4 concepts, which is life is suffering, which is something we hear a lot in Buddhism, essentially that we're all struggling with something. that the solution is, well, one of the solutions can be meditation, but part B of that, but it's hard and no one feels like they can do it.
Mm.
And then the invitation to move laterally in your thinking about what meditation is. And my experience in reading a lot about meditation and practicing it and doing all sorts of different forms is that, like a lot of things that we have been introduced to and taught, a lot of them are very male brain focused, not to mention neurotypically focused.
Oh,
So
yeah.
for me, so, you know, in the classical description of the meditational mind or the space, the idealistic mythological goal is to have an empty mind.
Mm.
Now, for the neurotypical male brain, feeling empty is peaceful.
Yeah.
Okay. For the classical female brain, and I'm not just limiting myself to biological sex, but just if that's how you identify, so classical female brain seeks fullness, connection. Right? So these are gross oversimplifications, but you're getting where I'm going.
Mm.
So the female identified person will crave connection and fullness in the mind. And then your neurodiverse brain and, you know, the spectrum from the autism spectrum, ADHD, which we now know is a spectrum, not just one thing or even three things, and any other manifestation of having neurodiversity, is that we require stimulation, a very specific kind, to feel relaxed. So now you've got 50% of the population and then another 10% within that wants to feel full, connected and stimulated. And that's what we need to be relaxed. And that was not represented anywhere in the styles of meditation that I'd come across. And so my TED Talk, in essence, was around just introducing people to a form that worked for me for all those reasons, which was mantra meditation, which creates this reliable, consistent fullness of the mantra. It allows for movement. So for tactile participation, we use mala beads as we go. And that magically then by default, my brain becomes very peaceful, counterintuitively, because I'm filling it up.
I 100% empathize with that. I'm always in therapy. I'm a neurodiverse individual as well, so always in therapy.
It's called self-care.
Yep. And even with my session last Friday, we spoke about, you know, meditation and becoming peaceful in the mind and those sorts of things. And I said, look, dude, I'm an ADHD kid. Like, my mind is never quiet. He's like, so when are you most relaxed? And what do you find as being a meditative state? It's like when I'm on the couch and there's nothing else other than music playing. And if it's dance-based music or electronic music, it's great because there's an awesome 8-bar cycle that just repeats and repeats and repeats. I know where I am all the time. I know what's coming next. And I can actually start to let that nonsense go away. Your music that's being produced now is obviously really capitalizing on that sort of environment, where it's like, well, now we're giving people that can't be quiet somewhere to be quiet.
It's not that you can't be quiet. It's just that
I can't.
Being quiet does not relax you by default. And understanding that is part of neurodiversity. In some cases, obviously it's called diversity for a reason.
Yeah.
Not every neurodiverse person is going to respond to that. But I just kept attracting so many people that didn't know they were neurodiverse like me until very recently. And they just go, I don't know what it is, but whenever I hear your music, and I would create these multi-leveled, layered, multi-rhythmic beds of vocal mantra in my music, both live and on my recordings, there was so much happening, so much richness, that those brains that were usually frustrated by the silence were suddenly absolutely enthralled and then by default relaxed. So in the same way that we've taken the word success and go, well, let's redefine what that actually means, because it doesn't mean the same thing for everybody. Let's also unpack what does relaxation look and feel like? What does meditation look and feel like? Does it have to be the same for everyone? Is there this ultimate state of mental being that we're supposed to get to? And I've realized the answer is no, there isn't. But figure out what it is that you need to get to and then follow that.
Yeah.
So, so my main message, looping right back to the TED Talk thing, was speaking about something that I'm passionate about, which is debunking myths for people. Other standard myths. And these are not original ideas from me either. These are things that I've picked up from teachers of my own, from my meditation teacher training teachers and other books and speakers that I've come across over the years. A lot of the time we get told, meditation has to be 20 minutes. That's when the neurochemical benefits kick in, blah, blah, blah. And sure, I know that that is true. However, I was also taught by an ex-Buddhist monk who came to the wellness centre I was working at, and he introduced the staff on site, of which I was one at the time, the power of 3-minute meditations. And he was the first person to debunk that myth, not just as a concept, but as a practice. He got us to do 6 rounds of 3-minute meditations. And at first you're like, oh my God, this 3 minutes is like the longest 3 minutes of my life, was silent. I was like, this is incredible. By the 6th round, when you're like at the back of the bus or on the train and you
on the nod, yep.
You're like that?
Yep.
No word of a lie. 30 seconds into the 6th round of 3-minute meditation, I was sitting up. I was like, bang. That's how quickly he'd shown us that you could get into a relaxed state really fast, and that it didn't have to be a long meditation. So I've carried information and experiences like that and many others, and I try to demystify it for people as well, make it easy.
Yeah. What was it like getting your diagnosis?
It was both extremely validating and also anticlimactic.
Yep.
Validating because I'd been, and I use the word loosely, researching, that is, trying to find information about ADHD, both online but also attending respected conferences and trying to get my information from credible sources, not just social media.
Yeah.
There is a lot of information and support on social media, and I am pro that to a point. However, I find that a lot of people who are posting on neurodiversity, ADHD in particular, make it look cute.
It's very surface level.
It can be cute. It can also be cripplingly debilitating, endlessly frustrating, and incredibly hard on one's sense of success and self-esteem. So going to conferences and listening to speakers from university and professors and such was really helpful. And basically by the time I'd finished attending the ADHD conference in 2023 in April, I'd been looking at this and sort of feeling into it for a while, mostly because I suspected that one of my children had it. And I thought, I want to get ahead of the curve.
Were you suspected you'd had it or no?
Not at that point.
Okay.
Although I'd started to learn that it was highly hereditary and that chances are if one of your children has it, then at least one of the parents is likely to have it.
And women are twice, if not 3 times more overlooked than men.
Yeah. There's a massive underdiagnosed proportion of women in my generation. So I'd gone to this conference, and by the end of that day, I went, okay, I'm 100% that she has it, and I'm like 90% that I have it. And then the process isn't easy to do. It's expensive. There's long wait lists, and it took me another 6 months to find someone, book in, wait, and then get my diagnosis. So I think one of the classic byproducts of getting a diagnosis, it's initially very validating, but then also there's a process of grief that you go through and go, wow, if I had have known that, like for instance, for me when I was at university, rather than thinking I wasn't smart enough to finish my degree when I'd been a brilliantly intelligent child right up until almost the end of high school. But in fact, what was holding me back was a lack of executive functioning. And for people who are not familiar with that term, the ability to self-organise and self-motivate in a structured, reliable way that I could study, I could ask for help, and I could get my assignments and my essays in on time. And that became increasingly more and more difficult, and to the point where I thought, I can't do this. I'm not cut out for this. So I wanted to ensure that my children, if they chose that sort of pathway, that wouldn't be the thing that would put them off. If they just decide they don't want to do something, well, fine. But don't decide you don't want to do something because you think you're not smart enough.
Yep.
Don't let that be the thing that gets in the way. And that's the hidden part of ADHD that people don't understand at all. And I get it. Even professionals in the industry, psychiatrists, one of the speakers that was at this conference who'd been a psychiatrist for 40 years and had only in the last 8 years started up the ADHD Professionals Association and started to spearhead this motion to the government to get more support for people. He said, we just didn't know what we didn't know.
Yeah.
And even for him as a professional, he spoke about going through a phase of grief for all of the patients that he'd missed and misdiagnosed as bipolar or anxiety and depression. And
Yep.
so, yeah, there was a period of grief, and then there's the frustration when you share it with certain people and they respond with the classic stigmatized response. Oh, well, you should just do more exercise. Or,
It's a superpower.
Oh, my God, it's a superpower. Or, I don't know, or just even stigma around medications that are available and what that means. So now for a long time, I really didn't want to tell anybody. And then eventually I just went, you know what, it's okay. But then there's still the risk that people will define you by your disorder.
Yes.
Totally ignoring the fact that is a part, significant part, but just a part of who I am today, but that I've been shaped by so many other things in my life than just that. But really, at the end of the day, I just want to be able to support my children the best I can. And if that means helping them go through that journey of awareness and giving them better strategies, but more to the point, allowing them to be compassionate with themselves in their minds, I think that's the best thing we can give for any child. If you make a mistake, it's not because you're dumb. It's not because you can't do it. It's just maybe you've got some part of your brain that isn't organised in a way that other people's are. So let's find another way for you to approach this relationship, this thing, this task, this career, and help you.
One of the things that echoed through my recent spate of therapy was the dialogue that teachers would have always bestowed upon people like us, which is, you're really smart, but.
Could apply yourself more. Oh my
really
God.
good, but. There was always a but. And like that was part of getting my diagnosis. I had to take all my paperwork to my psychiatrist. All my old school reports, every year was the same. You know, would be good if he applied himself. Can't focus, finishes work early, distracts other people, always loud, always talking, always blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, under today's guise, you look back at that and you go, that kid is neurodivergent. It's very clear. Back then, it was like, you're just a bad kid, behave. My parents were at we had like a thing called sub-school, which is like, you know, the boss of the school. My parents were on a first name basis with these people. And it was year on year, why can't this kid settle down? Why can't this kid just, you know, start paying attention? Where were the doctors? You know, where were the psychologists at school that were saying, oh, maybe something's up with him?
Sorry, did you just say psychologists at school,
At school.
in the 80s?
Yeah. What a bizarre concept. But yeah, the amount of people that have been overlooked, and I find even with a group of friends that I went to high school with, another diagnosis. Like we were the clan at school. We all found each other.
But see, that's the guy presentation.
Yeah, correct.
Very typical, stereotypical hyperactivity. Now, I was very smart, very quiet, very well behaved. In fact, I was smart enough that I'd finish my work and then I'd be coaching other people in my class on how to do the maths because they didn't understand it from the teacher.
Yeah.
Not to mention I was already a year younger than most of my peers because I'd skipped through a grade early on.
Oh, yeah, right.
So I was 16 when I finished high school.
Okay. That's full on.
Yeah.
So as well as having neurodivergent diagnosis later on in life, you've been accelerated anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So not surprisingly, no one was paying attention to me when my straight A run started to slip to a B in year 11. They're like, oh, well, you know, that's fair. But for me, it was devastating. It was the first time that I could not understand stuff and then I needed to study.
Yeah.
I'd never had to study. I didn't have the skills. And then you just start to think, oh, well, I just don't understand it. Whereas actually what I would have benefited from was some coaching on, well, this is what study looks like, Katie. This is how people learn stuff that isn't immediately obvious, and build some emotional resilience around my ability to approach new tasks. Yeah, so in girls and women, it presents very differently, and that it's often not hyperactivity. That one of the other big markers of ADHD is what they call an inattentive subtype.
So daydreaming, they often they refer to girls as being daydreamers instead of
oversimplification, but in essence, it's struggling to be able to focus. So there's this huge gap between either we can't focus on something if it's not stimulating enough, or we're hyper-focused on something which is we will not eat, sleep, or drink because we're learning about, the latest Star Wars, whatever.
Yeah.
You would have.
That was most of my life, actually.
Or even more confusing, a combined type, which is to oscillate between both. Now, one of my children, we've been having lots of conversations about their thought processes, and when I asked them recently, well, so how's it going in your head at school? How are you managing? And they're tending towards wearing headphones a lot. I said, what's that about for you? And the response was interesting. And they said, well, sometimes it's because listening to music while I'm working helps me focus. And other times because there's too much distraction with the noise in the classroom. And other times I use it because there's not enough stimulation in my brain for me to focus.
Yep.
And so the music generates this, and what we know now, it actually generates dopamine. I need some feel-good chemicals in my brain for me to actually apply myself to this task, or I need to block out the rest of the world so I can focus on this task. Yep. So this is one of the subtle things I think that's missed a lot, and misunderstood, or just not understood at all, is this challenge around how we are able to focus or unable to focus, and how much of a block that is in anything we're trying to do.
Yeah. I bought Apple AirPods for the first time late last year. Changed my whole world in the sense of now, even when I go out to the shop, going shopping was full on for me, right? It's one of those things where it's I got all these plans, I got a nice list, I'm going to go shopping, I'm going to get everything I need, it's going to be great. And I would walk in, and after about 3 minutes, it's what was I getting? But I want that for dinner now. And you'd leave with all the wrong stuff. You wouldn't have even wanted to go. Now I just put some background music on. They've got that transparency mode, which means I can still hear what's going on around me, but I've got just something familiar that's there. I can go shopping for 2 hours.
Yep.
I get everything that I need. I feel calm. My eyes aren't darting around the shopping center thinking where I got to go next. It's changed my whole existence in the physical realm. Didn't know about it until 6 months ago.
Same. Just going to Woolworths used to generate a low level but consistent level of anxiety. And when you're a mother or a parent of any sort with children, you got to keep buying food. And so going to Woolworths just becomes part of your life. And like yourself, I have a pair of noise-cancelling headphones, and every single time I go to Woolies, they're on noise cancel mode. I've got my list. I've got my happy playlist. That's it. I don't care. Good. There's no anxiety. There's no dread. There's no, oh my God, I got to get in the car and do that. None of that is happening. I'm just cool. What playlist am I going to have today when I'm going to go shopping? That's as stressful as it gets. Oh, bam. That's what I feel like.
Yeah.
And bang, I go in, I do my thing, I come out without all the anxiety and without all the exhaustion.
Exhaustion is the other thing.
That comes with it. And so this is something I've learned not just in my reading and going to the conference, but also continuing to discuss with my children about how, not only how their brains are during the day, but, when they come home and just are exhausted. And I know that's a teen thing too. You don't have to be neurodiverse to have that. But that what we know particularly about girls is that girls are much better at what we call masking. And that is covering the various behaviours and traits that people who are neurodiverse might do so that they can fit in, so that they can appear and present normally. I guess maybe generally speaking, younger boys just don't care. Whereas girls are wired to want to be more socially accepted.
And even like acceptance within girl groups is a different dynamic to boys as well.
Within peer groups, and then add in, being part of the queer community, and that throws a whole other lens on it altogether.
Yeah.
So all of these very subtle in themselves, these subtle masking things don't seem to require a lot of energy. But when you've got 5 different layers of masking going on, by the time you get home, it's like, yeah, I'm exhausted.
Yep.
Even though it's only 3 in the afternoon or 2 in the afternoon. And so, again, whether we are approaching adults or children with this, rather than thinking, oh, I just can't do life, and that thought ruminates and creates a sense of low self-esteem, self-worth, anxiety, depression, they can go, okay, I know that I'm exhausted because I've been what we call now peopling for 6 hours. So it's okay for me to go to my room and decompress.
Yep.
And these are the words that are used in our house because there's no stigma, there's no judgment. I'll just go, whew, that was a lot of peopling. Let's all just like take half an hour to just chill out in our own space and do whatever we need to do to rebalance and re-energize, and then we can come back and do the other things we need to do. So it's helped me have a lot more compassion for my kids, or for anybody really, but more to the point for them to have compassion for themselves and know that there's nothing wrong with them. But it's like, no, this is what I need.
It's so important.
To feel okay.
Yeah, it's so important because naturally neurodiverse people have pretty unhealthy self-talk normally, and that's based on the feedback that we get quite young where, you're okay, but the demasking thing, like mentioning that, it's one of the things for me in the last 12 months, I've had very defined, social groups and social interactions, and even just not detaching from them, but just being distant from them long enough that you can actually connect with your inner self rather than, well, who am I when I serve that group of people? It's slightly different than when I go and hang out with that group of people. And that was one of the other things that came up as a teen, the type of kid that fits in everywhere but belongs nowhere. It's like you're always, I'm friends with that group, but none of them are real friends. I just survive by fitting in. So yeah, for the last 12 months, the shedding of the masks.
How's that gone for you?
It's still happening. It has its ups and downs. It's painful. It's painful because you have to grieve the loss of a part of you as well that you thought was you. Like you thought that all these masks were genuinely you, but you're going, well, it's not. And I have to realize I'm not that person. And there's a bit of self-death there. You have to sort of grieve that. So that's been the part that's been the most challenging for me. It's the most rewarding, but man, it's a mission.
One of the weirdest things, and not weird for me, but weird to explain to people. And again, one of my longest time friends, when they were asking about, oh, do I miss performing? Or sometimes I get asked in an interview, but sometimes just by friends, oh, don't you ever want to go back and, get on the stage and do those sorts of gigs again? I'm like, no. But you're so good at it. I'm like, yeah, but I don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
I know that sounds really weird, but I fell into that commercially performative career. It was a happy accident, but really it wasn't what I wanted to do. And even though now my life is still full of music, I'm much more aligned with being a healer and a teacher and an inspirer of other human beings than being a performer. It's hard for people to get their head around because they look at you when you're on stage and go, oh, but you look like you're having such a great time. I'm like, yeah, that's because I'm good at that skill.
Yep.
But that does not mean that is my authentic self. It doesn't mean I'm totally faking, but it's not who I really, really am. For some people, being a performer is who they are.
Yep.
And I'm happy for them if they can make a career out of that. For me, it never was. And it's really, really hard for people to get their heads around that I don't enjoy it. I enjoy recording and writing and creating music, but I don't really enjoy performing it. I can do it, but I don't enjoy it anywhere near as much as people
And
that
part of that
I do.
is part of that's got to be the social attachment to fame. It's like, well, how could you not be happy on stage in front of 10,000 people? There's plenty of people that make it big and never want to perform again. Daniel John says it all the time. He's like, I would never go back on stage because that is just an unhealthy, unsafe place for me.
Yeah.
I don't want to do it.
Look, again, one of the greatest bits of advice I got along the way from the man that mentored me in my early years of doing jazz. And he said, one of the best tips I can give you about being in the business is if you look like you're having fun, the audience will have fun.
Yeah.
Because they're looking to you to be their barometer of how much fun am I supposed to be having.
Mm.
And I really took that on board, like super took that on board. And I'm outrageously good at having a good time on stage. Because I know that in that moment I do feel good about it, but more because it brings such joy to the audience. And I'm for that.
Which almost can be a little bit of a people-pleasing thing too, right?
100% it's that. Yeah, 100% it's that. But, people-pleasing, like a lot of other masking strategies, I've really started to let go of. Almost to the opposite extreme, but I'm trying to find a happy balance.
We sort of are getting to what would otherwise be the end, but before we do, what's next, and how do people get in? We're going to have links and all those things, but how do people get in touch if they want to find out a little bit more about what you're up to?
Probably the place to go now is actually YouTube, strangely enough. I've not used it a lot in the past, but Facebook and I have had a toxic relationship for about the last year.
Good.
So I'm slowly breaking up. Facebook will still be in my life, but there's not as much emphasis on that. So YouTube will display pretty much everything I've done. There's old jazz videos there. There's live jazz videos. I'm currently uploading weekly short mantra meditations. So when I say short, it's somewhere between 5 to 10 minutes. And then, of course, there's heaps of dance music stuff. And there's re-releases of Beautiful, like about 8,000 remixes of that.
Good.
So if people are into music, that's definitely the place to go. If you're interested more in meditation and healing, then my website, and we'll detail will be on there, is absolutely the place to go. And people can ask me whatever they like about that stuff. So, yeah. As to what's really next, I know that I'll write a book eventually, but like my TED Talk, it'll probably take me another 5 years to figure out exactly what that looks like.
Yep.
And then one of my longer term goals is to, I don't know, to say hit the speaker circuit seems very predictable, and I don't think it'll be that. But I suppose I want to expand my ability to reach people who essentially just need to know they're not alone. There's nothing wrong with them. And one of the things that I did share in my TED Talk, which was key and I wanted to get across, is that, if you're mid-40s or even 50s, please stop thinking of yourself as being almost at the end of your life. You're only halfway.
It's a very big trap.
And if I could spend the next 10 years just traveling around, reinvigorating people, expanding people's ideas of what is old. Old is when you've decided that you're finished.
Yep.
That's what old is. It's not how many years you've been alive.
Colonel Sanders started KFC in his 80s or something like that. Like, you can definitely do any of that sort of stuff.
So redefining old, or throwing out that word altogether and replacing it with words like wisdom and experience and excitement to be alive. That's what's next for me.
You only get one shot at it, so you want to bloody have a good crack.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I would have not have thought 25 years ago watching Pop Stars that here I will be sitting opposite
Nobody does.
Katie and having a conversation. So for me, it's been a joy. I am super proud of what you've gone through. I'm super proud that you've survived, and I'm super proud that you're actually making an effort to reach others. I think, your career is one of those things that everyone can observe, and there's lessons in there, particularly taking the hard road as opposed to the easy road. But I'm glad you're healthy. I'm glad you're well, and I'm glad you're still at it. It's awesome.
Thanks. Great to be here.
Thank you.